Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so thrilled to be talking to the fantastic team working behind the camera on the movie West Side Story about building the entire world of the movie. We are joined by costume designer Paul Tazewell, Janusz Kaminski, who's the director of photography on the film, Adam Stockhausen, who's the production designer, and Rena DeAngelo, who is the set decorator. And Paul, I wanted to start by talking about the color palettes that you came up with for a lot of the costumes, and particularly the way that with the jets, there's real tones and hues of blues and grays. And then with the sharks, we have the reds and the yellows. So you've used color as a real distinction between character throughout the film, and was interested in that initial kind of journey of really determining what those color palettes were going to be. And then the way that it also informed a lot of the materials that you've worked with, like the way that you've used a lot of denim to go in with those hues of the blues and the grays.
Sure. I think that the inspiration for that goes back to when, I'm thinking about Romeo and Juliet, and what West Side Story, the story that West Side Story is based on. Even the Zeffirelli film, where, he did, had the two houses that were in two different color palettes. And so taking that as a springboard, I thought, oh, okay, well, let's see how this might work given the where we are in 1957, and also that we were going to be in a very naturalistic New York City and in and about the New York area. I launched into creating kind of the teams, or the gang colors, splitting them jets to sharks, and really trying to align where they were coming from as well. I mean, that the jets really align more with the city and the concrete and all the steel and the grit that is their territory, or their version of the territory, versus the sharks that are coming, migrating from a tropical island, or that if they're coming from Puerto Rico, they're carrying with them the energy of the nature, the flowers, all of that is imbued culturally and stylistically within the Latinx culture. That is a little bit of a generalization, but just setting up rules for how this world might be presented, and letting New York be the neutral, letting New York stay in kind of a gray-green world. And that was what was true of my background for many of the street scenes that you might see. Where it's most powerfully seen is within the Dance of the Gym, where you've got the dance battle between the Jets and the Sharks and their girlfriends, and how the Sharks kind of flood into this space that's already inhabited by these swirling, the clothing of the Jets, in blue tones.
And Janusz, you have that idea of color throughout the screen as well with your cinematography. And there's also a lot of ways in which you play around with light. And because of the genre, it allows you to have both a lot of very realistic lighting, but also to really play around with elements of the romanticism, like the first time we see Maria having more of a spotlight on her, or the flecks of light when it's her and Tony, kind of together for the first time. And so how did you think about the different tone shifts within the film, and the different tones of scenes, and how you really wanted to play around with light to represent character in a lot of ways?
Sure. As Paul spoke about, colors, of course, I can photograph what's in front of the camera, and when it's great, it's easier for me. So Paul created amazing storytelling with his design, and Rena and Adam, definitely allowed me to create a visual world that is fully contribution of what they've done. So I always say, how do we create a period? I say, well, talk to the production designer. He puts the cars, the wardrobe designer puts the wardrobe, the makeup does the proper makeup, and it's easy for me. At that point, I can just make sure that I don't mess it up, because they've already provided the image, the frame, with essentially a essential image that sets the story in the reality of the story. So that's a little bit easy. So I always have to think, do not mess it up. on this movie, as you mentioned, it is a love story. It is and Paul spoke about this as well. So you have to convey that element of the story where people are seeing each other for the first time and they falling in love and I think the camera and the light and all that stuff needs to reflect that. So consequently, we've established through the director's directions, we've established this world of Maria and her reality of being at the dance with the guy that was a little bit of a mundane, not very inspiring, but yet guy that had some panache. And at the moment when she's about to almost start accepting the reality of this guy, this man, tall man, kind of heavy, very charming, slightly dangerous, enters the room in a way that you have to look at him. The camera pans from left to right, and Mike Feist says, Tony, we pan left and we show Ansel entering the room, very energetic, very charismatic. And immediately there's attraction between these two individuals. And as you can see, the movie, that we've used various tools to enhance that, with a little bit of a slow motion, with lights, with composition, with putting dancers between the lens and the actors, that we're looking at. So you're establishing that environment and that attraction between them by watching them through things happening between the camera and them, right? So it's relatively easy. The costumes were amazing, Paul. I mean, there's the whole thing, at the dance hall was just so beautiful. We did really good. We did really good in this department. Yeah.
I love that. And then Adam and Rena, similarly to everything that Paul was describing about the color aesthetic of the costumes, we really see that transcend over into the production design, into the set design. If we look at the home that Bernardo, Anita, and Maria all share, that's got that similar vibrancy of color and detail, even down to like every single object that we see around the room is telling us a story about them, and that's very different to when we go over to Valentina, to the shop and to her home and the types of colors and the types of shades and details and objects that we see there. And so what was like that similar trajectory for the two of you in really figuring out what the leading aesthetic was going to be that represented character within spaces?
Well, Rena, maybe I'll jump in first on that one, and then hand it over to you. I think, building off what Paul said about defining a color palette for the two different groups. Everything was operating within the umbrella of New York City, although it's not documentary New York City. It's sort of we're at this a very climactic moment here when this clash is happening, and everything is raised up a little bit. But I was really struck by the line when we're down in the basement for the first time, when there's dust on everything, there's dust everywhere, and we were pushing, I think, towards the jets being in that world of concrete and steel and dust and debris and demolition, and then going much more strongly into colors, all colors in a way, occasionally shifted towards reds and yellows and things, but really more the idea of color when we're with the sharks, and so that just became a balancing act of where we could bring in color and how much color we could bring in before we started stepping forward too much. We always wanted to find a balance where the world was as bright as we could get it while still holding well behind everything. What do you think?
And then when we thought we had enough color in that room, and then we added the chiffon, the colored fabric around the room. It was like, there's not quite enough color yet. We're just gonna hang 20 pieces of very colorful fabric in the room too. But that apartment was fun to do because we wanted it to feel homey, and we wanted it to feel in the color palette that we were talking about. But we wanted to make it feel like young people lived there, but they had an older sensibility. They were grown up in a way. I've tried to find as many colorful elements, red dishes, even the cabinets and stuff in the kitchen were of the color, and the linoleum was something I had found, a linoleum that was that was really colorful, that was from the 40s, and we had, so it was a lot of color, but I don't think we didn't cross a line. I don't think we went too far.
I'm not jumping right now because it's very essential that your viewers understand what we're talking about. And color is an amazing storyteller, right? As we all know, we photograph what we put in front of the lens. And it's not just, well, let's put this because it feels like it should be there, but it would be charismatic. Every single element that's in front of the frame serves one purpose, which is enhances the story. And as much as the color can improve the story, occasionally you can see movies where that color becomes too contrived. The green hat and green skirt, and then you got a green door, and it just becomes too much. Where in this movie you're dealing with people who are very, very, very experienced, and the color is another storyteller. It's very essential to speak very briefly upon that. Yeah. And again, because there was so much color, I didn't have to enhance it too much. I just had to put enough light to not mess it up what they provided me with, which is the costume needed to be lit properly. And in fact, on many occasions, particularly during the dance number, I would put extra light, not just in the torso and faces, but I wanted to get the bottom portion of the frame to be illuminated. So when the fabric swirls in the air, you can sense the color, you can sense the festivity. That's all.
And there's so many artisans and craftspeople even beyond your teams on set that really contributed to the incredible amount of detail that we see on screen. For you, Paul, whether it's a company that are specializing in the pleating that you need for material, or a leather company that you're working with for the shoes or the denim, for you, Rena, going to a lot of the prop houses, but also really sourcing a lot of antique goods, that are very authentic to the time period. And so for all of you, what are some of the spaces where you really wanted to also be able to pull in incredibly skilled artisans beyond the crew to make sure that all of those details in every single corner of the frame really authentically represented the time period, but within the aesthetic of the film that you were all striving for?
What was great for me was, to see the blend, and which was necessary, this blend of those people that have done a lot of theater work versus those people that have done a lot of film work. All in, because we were filming in New York, I had access to all of the shops of New York, and those are the same shops that are building all of the productions on Broadway. And then also, custom-made shoes and, all those things that you need to have for dancers for a musical, things need to be built so that they function in a very specific way. And then there's a specific, know-how and insight in, managing a film and managing the size and scope of this film, where you're bringing in 400 plus background in one day. And and figuring out how to dress them, and with the design, creating a blend with those two. So it was necessary to have a team, and they were an amazing team of assistants and the wardrobe supervisor to support what I was trying to do with the design.
And were there outside groups that you were working with, Adam and Rena, as well?
Yeah, Adam, go.
Well, I would say it's not so much an outside group, but specialists within the team of the graphic design team who did hundreds of signs for because signage was such a key way that we were distinguishing where we were and whose territory we were in. And it's just layer upon layer upon layer of that, and also the scenic artist work to where it's indistinguishable whether we're in a location alley or on a stage set or when we're in the rubble piles, which bits of it are real and which bits of it are foam, and you absolutely can't see the line, and that's incredible work.
That's right.
Yeah, and I use a whole lot of different pickers and antiques dealers, and there's a particular vendor I thought I was going to have to go to LA for a lot of this stuff to bring in, but there's a vendor in New Jersey actually now who has Ron Fennick, who has every conceivable thing I could possibly need for these sets. When Adam said we needed 2 matching morgue tables in enamel, and I walked in and he had them, and then he had cigarette machines and water fountains and everything that I could possibly want. And then we had the vendors who brought in 500 to 1,000 truckloads of bathtubs and bricks and dirt and debris and garbage and all of that every single day. So it was just a huge collaboration of a lot of people making the piles in Patterson look real.
And Janusz, I wanted to talk about the motion and the choreography of the camera within the choreography of all of the musical numbers and all of the dance moments, because I know that you and your team were present during the dance rehearsals, so that even at that point you could start marking out where the camera's going to be. And what's so beautiful about watching a lot of those scenes is that you really bring us right into the center of the movement and the motion, and you allow us moments to really connect with the characters, and yet you still also allow the camera to pull back and give us those wide shots that give us this sheer sense of scope that we get from having 400 background dancers all in a scene together. And so how did being present during all of the dance rehearsals and when they were figuring out all of the choreography really help in landscaping a lot of that design of where the camera was going to sit and where it was going to move and carry the audience?
Let's just make it very clear from the beginning. Steven, all his life, blocked the scenes, made movies through camera, and he is expert at blocking and moving the camera to the crowd and through, not necessarily through crowd. So he's got very clear characteristic of how the camera moves and what he tries to convey. And part of the success of his movies that he knows how to do it, right? I just had to facilitate his needs. I had to make sure that, once we realized during the rehearsals that the actors, dancers are very precise with their movement, particularly with the places where they land or how they move through the frame, we could bring the camera very close to them and be not just a passive observer, but participate in the dance with them, to the point that sometimes we're able to, we're able to lead them, where it appears that they are following the camera, but because of our knowledge, we knew where they're going to go, so we're preceding them. So that's the thing, how do you make this, 1957 Broadway performance, but yet enhance it with modern panache, and unfortunately there's enough equipment and technology to be able to do it, but also it's essentially to realize that there's a great collaboration between the camera operator, Mitch Dubin, and Steven, we've done 25 years together, and they very in tune. My job was to make sure that they doing the good job to some degree. And what that means, there were brief conversations about composition, maybe occasionally go wider, I always like wide shots. I love wide shots. I like high angle shots. Mitch was always concerned with, you putting the lights right to the side of the frame. I don't have ability to move the camera through it. And I say, well, that's why we've got the light there, so we can maintain certain composition so you don't mess it up, Mitch. So that's the idea. We're a great Steadicam operator, his name is Baz Moyer. He used to be a dancer. He's this stunningly tall, beautifully built, athletic man, mature man who used to be a dancer. So he understood the moves because of his past experience. So he was able to move with the dancers to the frame. So that was the part of the whole choreography. And he could rely on the actors' landing position because that's what they trained to do. So that aspect was relatively easy. Again, to just make sure that we're providing enough beauty and meaningness through the frame. That was more my job rather than choreography of the camera with the dancers. And Justin Peck and his partner, choreographer, wife, Patricia, they were very essential in that particular process, where, again, based on what we experienced during the rehearsals, we knew what's going to happen on the day. But of course, on the day, things change because all of a sudden you've got hydrants, you've got sidewalk curbs, you've got this and that. So the choreography had to be adjusted to meet the reality of a particular location. So it's a great collaborative art, but no, without Steven, who is the master in terms of the camera storytelling, it would have been a different story. Many tried to imitate him. Some of them came close to, but nobody suppressed his abilities to do that.
And Paul,
can I jump in on that?
Yes, please do.
I just wanted to say really quickly, what Janusz was just talking about with dealing with then the reality of the situation in these locations in New York. It was incredible how, I was terrified coming into it that all of these rubble piles and things we would have twisted ankles left and right, and the whole thing would come crashing down. But it was just extraordinary watching them embrace the craziness of the surroundings, whether it was a giant rubble pile or this broken down pier, and literally leaping over cars. They were unstoppable. And it was really incredible to watch
Nobody got injured. Nobody got injured. They're so athletic. They're so good, the kids. They've been dancing for 10, 15 years since the age of 8. It's just amazing. To see the camaraderie and how well they work with each other. It was amazing. It was just like a great pleasure.
Yeah.
And speaking of character, Paul, I wanted to talk about the evolution that you carry us on with Maria through the costumes, and even down to that beautiful homage of the white dress with the red kind of belt round it that Anita gives her in the film, because you use, again, color and style and the type of looks that she's wearing really carry us on this journey that she's going through emotionally, from that innocence and learning a little bit more about who she is to the end, when everything that she's been through is all reflected through the costumes that you carry her into throughout.
Yes, with the white dress, that was one of the two requests that Steve made in the design, from the very beginning, was to have our version of the white dress moment that was from the original Broadway show, which I think was absolutely smart, because I think that it taps into her culture and where she's coming from, her innocence and potential age. And her tie to the church. Just within her culture, that her tie to the church. And then for Maria to offer up this red belt that she takes off of her waist, it's like a coming of age. It's Maria starting on her journey into womanhood. But subtly done. And then when you've got your, as I set it up with the color, when you've got the jets in cool tones and the sharks in warm tones, it was seeing how she bridges over into the jet world as she falls in love with Tony, as she moves deeper and deeper into that love. It's how she embraces that color story in the way that Valentina has embraced this color story. And then I'm also showing, or I attempted to show, her maturity. And actually it's the choices that I made about her clothing, I feel are more grounded than how we might see Maria. She has a mind of her own, and it's very clear within her scene that she's a very strong woman, and is making choices about the clothing that she wants to wear. And then to the end, when Tony is killed, it's almost a dress that's a little too mature for her, still within that cool tone world, but much darker, just sober. So that was all that I was trying to go after with her color story.
Yeah. And because Paul was mentioning, the source material of the Broadway production, there, the film is such a beautiful homage to the original source material, and yet so uniquely its own identity as the way that it's told this story. And so what was that balance for all of you in finding some of the details or some of the small spaces where you wanted to pay homage to original source material of West Side Story against the spaces where you really wanted to create new looks and new aesthetics and new visual ways of telling the story?
Ladies first.
Yeah.
I guess what we were trying to do is open it up a little bit more and make it more have the city be a character rather than make it the stage play in the original film felt more like a theater piece rather than an open movie. And I think we opened it up, and Janusz opened it up into it's such a giant movie. It looks like a giant movie, but yet it's still very intimate at the same time. And I think that's what we were trying to pay homage to the original, but still make it modern in its scope. Maybe, I don't know. Adam, what do you think?
Well, I actually don't know what the original stage play actually looked at. I don't know if there is a recording of it, but I haven't seen one. It was definitely an inspiration musically, just listening to the cast recording over and over and over and over and over. The film, the 61 film, I mean, it is more a matter of making sure that we weren't inadvertently making the same creative choice, really. I mean, like, for instance, when we were in the demolition area, there was reference that we were looking at these doors, because they would salvage doors from the sites as they were demolishing things, and seeing these very strong lines of them, and going, well, that's an interesting idea, but it was used as a creative choice so clearly in this other film that maybe we want to let that one go. That we have enough other ideas bubbling up here to grab. So for us, I think there was such a challenge in finding this New York of 1957 that couldn't be gotten just by going outside and looking at it. It had to be sort of put back together like a jigsaw puzzle. That we were kind of looking for the best bit here and the best bit here and the best bit here to sort of pull all together this new version of this old place.
And Janusz, I wanted to talk a little bit about storyboarding when it comes to the camera department and all of the cinematography, because it sounds like for you, actually, the preference is to not necessarily storyboard out a lot of times, but that there's certain moments and scenes where it does help because of the logistics. So like the balcony scene with Tony and Maria, because of the rig setup that you're going to need, where the camera is going to have to go, that for a scene like that, it's really helpful to have storyboarding in advance just to figure out some of the logistics. And so what were some of the spaces where you found it helpful, and some of the spaces where you really wanted to leave that area of discovery open to once you were on set with Stephen and with the cast and in the moment shooting scenes?
But I mean, it's a very interesting question, and I wish I was more excited about responding to this question. But the storyboards are there to serve one purpose on our movies. You're making a CGI visual effects driven sequence, you need the storyboards so you can budget the movie and you can create the visual effects. Or you're doing stunt sequence, and for the safety reason and for logistic reasons, all the crew members that are involved in the particular scene know what to create and how to secure that the actors are never in any jeopardy, right? So that part is, clearly that's how we do storyboards. Stephen did some extensive storyboards apparently, and we started with the Cool, which was the waterfront sequence, and very clearly after the very first rehearsal, he clearly realized that the storyboards that he built based on rehearsals that he witnessed are irrelevant to some degree of what's happening on the set. So he put them away on the first day, and we started making movie the way we normally make. We rehearse and then we tell the story. That has to do with nature of the story and great choreography. So that's the mystery of the storyboards. We've done other movies where we had more extensive storyboards, but the movies that we've done, which are character driven, performers driven, are seldom supported by the storyboards. But I want to jump slightly for a brief moment to another aspect of what these guys did, meaning the art department and costume department, because our perception of time is very biased by what we as the audience witness, right? So the 50s and the 60s are not relatively easy, but you have certain concept of what that look like, I want to use the example of Lincoln, which was, completely different time period. And the art department, the costume department, they went through extensive research, and to the point where the manufacturer, the carpet, Rick Carter, who's also a wonderful production designer, he found the fabric and everything looked really, really, really authentic and very beautiful. When you looked at it, it was just garbage because all the colors were so vibrant and they were authentic for that particular time, but not necessarily what our perception of that particular time was, you know. So we ended up desaturating the images so you could bring the cacophony of color down to what the audience would have think they remember, right? So that's what I just want to talk about, essence of that particular aspect of what we all do for a living here, you know, and how we are making movies for the audience who may have certain expectations which are not always based in authenticity of that particular period.
Yeah, no, I really love that detail. And I mean, the work overall that you've all done on the film is so intricately detailed in every single element of what you've brought to the screen. And so wanted to end by just asking each of you about if there's a particular detail or element that you're proudest of having contributed or having put together visually in the way that you've done your work creatively on this film. Adam, I'm going to come to you first.
Detail. It's a bit more of a global thing on the film, but in our very first conversation, Stephen, about West Side Story, Stephen said, "Get it outside. You know, just make sure that that we can do this on location." And there were a lot of sort of forces making that a real challenge. You know, one of them was the way the city is modernized. Another one is how hard it is to do this kind of shutdown work in New York City, because the city needs to keep moving and the buses need to keep moving and all that. And so everything we did was an attempt to sort of push the movie outside, and there was a lot of apologizing along the way as we would drag everybody. I'm sorry, guys, by the way, about some of the alleys and slightly unsavory places where we shot, but it gave this richness, and I'm very proud of that.
Yeah. And for you, Rena?
Yeah, I think I love the way the streets turned out, and all of the Patterson, which you don't know is Patterson because it's the demolition site, and then the streets that were around the corner from the demolition site, and the way that we managed to shoot in 11 million different places, and it all felt like it was in 6 blocks, and it was completely believable. And I just think that all the storefronts and all of the vibrancy of the streets, I think, made the movie.
That's really wonderful. And how about for you, Paul?
I would say sticking to my guns on my color story, and and impressing that on my staff, because there were times when I was brought things that were like, no, that's not, those are not the rules, and really making sure that I was rigid about that. I think that paid off.
Yeah. And Janusz?
Well, mine will be a little bit more global because, I mean, as a newcomer to this country about 40 years ago, I grew up in the system where you didn't have musicals, where the heroes were Stalin and Lenin, not Superman, Spider-Man. So my imagination of Broadway performance while I was living there was completely matched by my personal experience when I actually visited Broadway. And what that means is it's panache, it's beautiful, it's elegant, it's suspenseful, it's fun, it's emotionally moving. So I think that little detail I wanted to introduce to this movie to continue with that concept, where I maintain the dreamy quality of fantasy world, because the moment you have people singing in the streets, you are in a different world, and maintaining that through the schedule, maintaining that through several city blocks and different lighting conditions and all that stuff. That's what I'm most proud of, that I was able to maintain that appearance of Broadway panache.
Well, watching this film was very genuinely one of my favorite cinematic experiences in the last few months. And in large part, that's because of all of the details that you've brought to screen and the way that you've helped tell this story for all of us. So thank you so much, and congratulations on the incredible work on West Side Story.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
It was good to be here.